This is going to be the single most devastating video to the entire One Piece debating community that I've ever made. While most people don't buy the moon and planet level arguments that One Piece wankers make, a lot of people do however buy the large country level arguments which mainly spawn from Onigashima. Matter of fact, if you look at Versus Battles wiki, every single feat they claim is large country level or above relies on Onigashima, precisely. Because those people have the tendency to nitpick scans and take the 2 or 3 scans where the island appears to be the biggest, completely ignoring the fact that those panels are inconsistent, because Oda is well known to not draw consistent sizes. Some calculations nitpick that one panel where the island appeared to dwarf a bunch of ships, whereas other calculations, including versus Battlefick's new calc, use Kaido's size and then compare Kaido to the island, even though Kaido's size is completely inconsistent and sometimes he appears to be not much smaller than the island, sometimes he appears much smaller than it, and sometimes Kaido even appears to be not much larger than normal humans. So we know versus Battles Wiki has the tendency and the biased mods to basically make those biased calculations and use those nitpicked scans, which gets, according to them, the horn of the island at 4 kilometers in width, the skull at 18 kilometers in height, and the diameter of the island overall at 57 kilometers. If you've actually read the show, you'd know that this is completely false, going by what's actually shown in the manga and the anime. We have so many examples that I'll start with categories. First category, the island compared to characters. In chapter 1009, where Big Mom gets thrown off the island. You can very clearly see that she is very visible and isn't much smaller than the horn of the island, which versus Battles Wiki's calculation would claim is 4 kilometers in terms of width. Since Big Mom is about 10 meters tall, then that heavily dwarfs the island. In chapter 1011 we also see that Big Mom was about a few dozen meters at most from the island because she was very visible from the point of view of the island, which means that you can't even make the argument that it's just point of view and she was thrown off much closer to our point of view, because once again she was only a few dozen meters at most away from the island. Next up we have chapter 1015 where Yamato can be seen from ground level even though she's at the top of the island, which would be impossible if the island was truly 20 kilometers in terms of height, because you simply cannot see a human from that far away. Matter of fact, from 1 kilometer altitude you can hardly even see buildings. This is shown several more times, with examples being chapter 1016, where both Kaido and Yamato are visible from a wide shot that can depict the whole island almost. Later on in chapter 1025, where Kaido and Yamato don't appear that much smaller than the island, and in fact the skull of the island appears to be at most about 100 meters in diameter. We have chapter 1033, where King's attack, which is seen being smaller than Zoro, can be seen from a wide shot that can depict the whole island, which would be impossible if the island was truly 57 kilometers in diameter. It would have to be at least a few hundred meters. Yet another example can be chapter 1042, where Gear 4 Luffy does not appear much smaller than the horn of the island, which versus Battles Wiki would like us to believe is 4 kilometers in terms of width. If that's not enough, we have many shots of Kaido not being much smaller than the island, despite the fact that Kaido is so small that he is dwarfed by a small city, and on top of that, his head does not appear much bigger than characters like Luffy or Yamato who are normal-sized humans. We also have Momosuke, who is able to wrap himself around the whole island, even though he is so small that Yamato is not much smaller than his head, as seen on multiple panels and anime, of the many shots of Momosuke not being much smaller than the island. Keep in mind, those are just a few examples, because there are a lot more examples out there. That said, we can move on to the next category, with the island compared to other structures, and the main structure that we'll focus on is the flower capital. This town is so small that it can only house and fit about 10 city blocks, each city block only containing a few houses, and the whole land does not appear to be even as big as a kilometer, considering the fact that buildings on the land are not much smaller than the land itself, and matter of fact, a single city block makes up of a massive portion of the land. We know those are not supermassive buildings, and they are in fact normal-sized buildings and houses, considering how we saw Luffy and other characters compared to those houses. With this in mind, the land of flowers is so small that it's comparable to some of the smallest towns in the world. This is quite consistent, as for example Orange Town only has 10 houses to its name. Now that we've made clear just how small the flower capital is, it's not even a kilometer in diameter, now we have the fact that the flower capital is actually larger than Onigashima. Yes, you heard that right, it's actually way larger than Onigashima. We know this as when Onigashima was traveling towards the Land of Flowers, we get point of view shots from the Land of Flowers to Onigashima. The flower capital from the point of view of Onigashima appears to be several times bigger than Onigashima from the point of view of the flower capital, which would require the flower capital to be much larger than Onigashima. Top of that we have the map, which shows that Onigashima is actually smaller than the flower capital. But it gets even worse than that because Onigashima is directly seen compared to the islands in both the anime and the manga. In episode 1076, when Onigashima was falling towards the flower capital, we get a point of view from behind the island, which is obstructing the flower capital, and despite the fact that it's much closer to our point of view than the flower capital, the islands still appear to be smaller than the flower capital, which implies that the flower capital is immensely larger than Onigashima. We have chapter 1049, where after the island fell, it's seen from a point of view closer to the viewer than the Land of Flowers, and despite that, despite the fact that it's obstructing the flower capital, it still appears to be smaller than it, which once again suggests that this island is actually much smaller than the flower capital. It doesn't end here because in chapter 1053 we get another point of view where the island appears to be much smaller than the flower capital, despite it being closer to us than the flower capital and it even obstructing some of it. Matter of fact, even from a point of view where the island is much closer to us than the flower capital, buildings on the flower capital, which are normal-sized buildings, appear to be about as big as the nose of Onigashima, which according to VSBW Wiki's calculations would be several kilometers. This is backed up by a flashback where Onigashima is seen inside the flower capital and the island is actually smaller than the flower capital once again. If that's not enough, we have yet another case of Oda directly drawing the flower capital compared to Onigashima, and the flower capital is once again larger than Onigashima. The final example is going to be Onigashima appearing to be smaller than Mount Fuji, despite the fact that Mount Fuji isn't much bigger than the flower capital. This scene in chapter 1006, where despite the fact that Onigashima is much closer to our point of view, it appears to be only a bit wider than Mount Fuji's bottom. And we also have another shot where, from the same flashback, Mount Fuji directly dwarfs Onigashima despite the fact that Onigashima is closer. So this concludes this category. However, now we move to the final category, which includes verbatim statements and narratives. As we know, when One Piece debaters and VSBW Wiki are presented with such challenges, they usually just claim, oh, it's inconsistent sizes, inconsistent paneling, Oda isn't good at drawing consistent sizes, Oda doesn't care about sizes. And yet this discredits their entire argument as it's based on using those same inconsistent panelings. But unlike those, I actually have context on my side, because context makes it very clear that Onigashima is not meant to be that big of an island. Simply the fact that Onigashima is verbatim said to be small, and also the fact that Onigashima is so small and light that its fall on top of the flower capital won't destroy the whole thing and won't kill everybody in it, despite the fact that the people there are normal humans. Because what's verbatim stated to be destroying the flower capital isn't the island's late, isn't the kinetic energy of the island free falling on top of the flower capital, which is literally just a few city blocks, which implies the diamond is so light and so small that it won't even destroy a few city blocks when it free falls on them. This is backed up by Oda drawing a hypothetical where diamond does fall on the Land of Flowers in chapter 1027, and we see that some buildings in the island survived the explosion. This directly shows that diamond free falling on top of a small town won't even destroy a few city blocks. That's how small and light diamond is. Yet according to VSBW Wiki, diamond had continent level kinetic energy, which is just laughable. The whole calculation doesn't even work considering VSBW Wiki is claiming that the flower capital has a diameter of 400 kilometers, which is based on their own flawed scaling of Onigashima's size, despite the fact that the flower capital is seen being incredibly small. Then they claim that the distance between Onigashima and the flower capital was over 1000 kilometers, even though we can see normal-sized buildings from the altitude of Onigashima. For comparison, this is how bigger buildings look from 1 kilometer away. This means that Onigashima wasn't even 1 kilometer away from the flower capital. This in turn reduces the velocity of the feed by over 1000 times and reduces the power of the feed by over 1,000,000 times. Narrative supports how small diamond is even further because it stated multiple times the diamond would fall directly on top of the Land of Flowers. Matter of fact, we see a direct illustration showing how it would fall near the center of the flower capital. And despite this fact, diamond would still not cover the whole thing. Because despite the fact that diamond would fall near the center of the flower capital, we get two illustrations that show that it won't be able to cover the whole thing and it won't crush the whole thing. If diamond was truly 57 kilometers in terms of diameter, then it would have most definitely crushed the whole thing. It would have most definitely covered the whole thing, given the fact that it would fall near the center of the capital. So at the end of the day, all this is a few versus battles wiki moderators taking a few inconsistent panels and using them at face value while ignoring narrative evidence, verbatim evidence, and a higher amount of visual evidence to make their point. Those people using all those things I mentioned, narrative evidence, verbatim evidence, higher amount of visual evidence, would be the bad faith side. It would be the biased side. It would be the anti-One Piece side. Well, the most neutral side and the most fair to One Piece side would be to use a single panel or two panels where diamond appears to be the biggest and use them to scale absolutely every single feat in the show, no matter how much the narrative disagrees with it, no matter how much verbatim statements disagree with it, and no matter how much other visual evidence, a higher amount of visual evidence, disagrees with it. So with that in mind, all the Onigashima calculations and in turn every single feat they have for One Piece being large country level or above pretty much go to the trash because they are unusable now. This massively nerfs every single Onigashima based feat, which is literally all the impressive feats they have. Matter of fact, the two best feats for One Piece that are not related to Onigashima are hardly even country level and are much closer to small country level than they are to large country level. So now we've got One Piece's god tiers all the way down to country level at this point. And given how One Piece fans have the tendency to blow calculations out of proportions, I don't have much faith that those country level calculations are accurate to begin with. So perhaps in a future video I'll be looking at those calculations and get One Piece all the way down to island level once again. But for now I'm satisfied with this video and how well it turned out to be. If you like this video, consider hitting that like button and sharing it around so that we can spread accurate power scaling, as well as common sense. And if you like my content, consider subscribing to my channel, because on this channel I don't just wank a verse because I like it or because I want to show off just how much of a rat I can be, like a lot of other people. Matter of fact, most of the shows that I do debunks on are shows that I genuinely love and have spent a lot of time watching and reading. So this is it for this video and see you in the next one.